From US, today with me, I have as my guest Nicole Barile, an expert in intercultural communication and global talent development. She has helped clients work effectively across cultures for more than 15 years now. Some of the topics she covers in her trainings tackle preparing for future of global work, doing business in an international context, developing a global mindset, cultural agility, and many, many more. Welcome, Nicole, and thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
As a first question for you, how would you explain to a potential client the added value of your services? Because we all know that more often than not, actually, these types of services, intercultural trainings, are usually overlooked when it comes to international assignments.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, that is true. And I think a lot of that has to do with not really understanding what intercultural training is. And I think that's partially because intercultural training has actually evolved and changed over the years. You know, maybe 20 years ago, it was kind of more about cultural awareness or cultural sensitivity or learning do's and don'ts, so you don't want to offend.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And now really, because the world is so global, the value of intercultural training is not necessarily in the do's and don'ts. You know, people could look that up in Google, right? But it's learning skills. So it's skills building on how to change your behavior and adapt, right? Because we're all working on global teams. So you might be relocating to Sao Paulo, Brazil, right? And you take a training on intercultural training on Brazil, but really what you're learning there are skills that you can use on how to improve communication and doing business around the globe, because you're focusing more on the values that people hold that drive their behaviors instead of focusing, on avoiding mistakes, for example. And I think also the value is that many companies don't realize that you can customize these trainings to meet or match your company's strategy, right? Or your organization's goals. So for example, if you are a global company operating in 10 different countries, yes, you might want to focus your training on Brazil if that's where someone's relocating to, but you can also talk about leading or managing multicultural teams, right? Or just, communicating on a global team. So that's where I think the disconnect is and why people don't invest in it as much as they really should.
Nicole, you have quite an extensive experience in this field. Would you have for us a story of two cultures clashing?
Yeah, so, I mean, I have a lot of stories, but the one that comes to mind, and because I use this often in my trainings as an example, is when I was in Brazil. And so I was waiting for a Brazilian colleague to pick me up from the hotel, me and my US American colleague. She was supposed to meet us at the hotel at 6 p.m. to take us to dinner. This was several years ago. And she did message us to say, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm running late. I think maybe at 6:15 or so, she messaged us. I'm running late.
6:15, not 15 to 6.
Right. After 15 after she was supposed to be there, she messaged us to say, I'm sorry, I'm running late. I'll explain when I get there. So we said, okay, no problem. We waited in the lobby. And she actually showed up at 8 p.m. To meet us 2 hours late. But why I like this example is most of the time, when you hear these cultural clash examples, they kind of stop there and people go, oh, yes, that's because Brazilians have a different view of time than you Americans do, that kind of thing. That is true. But I think the interesting lesson from this is that you need to find out the why, right? You can't just say, and that's where I think kind of ties to your first question. Intercultural training is not, okay, Brazilians see time differently and the end, right? It's why, and then what can you do about it? But the reason she was late was, for me, very fascinating. She was leaving her house on time, but then her neighbor stopped by unexpectedly and wanted to talk to her. Nothing urgent, but wanted to have a conversation about something.
Chit-chat.
Yes. And because her relationship with that neighbor was way stronger than the relationship she had with me and my colleague, it was actually more rude for her to say to her
To dismiss
neighbor,
the neighbor.
right, and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have dinner, I have to go. We can chat later." It was more rude to dismiss her than to be
Mm-hmm.
late for us. Whereas, in the US, if I'm running late to dinner and my mother calls, I'm going to say, "Hey, sorry, mom,
I'll call you
I have to
later.
go." Right, right. So I just like that story because it illustrates the why behind it, right? And also the point that really intercultural communication, it's about communication, but it's about relationships, really.
Did you have to learn something the hard way during your career? Was there anything that you wished someone had told you before
Mhm.
finding out on your own?
Yeah, there's probably several things that I wish I would have learned sooner, but the one that really sticks with me is that it's okay to say no, right? So, especially I think this probably applies to a lot of people when they're younger and starting their career maybe in their 20s after university. You want to do well, and so at least for me, I didn't ever want to say no. And that could mean working 10, 12 hours a day because I couldn't, I wasn't really focusing on myself and what I needed. And I just wanted to do a good job, right? And be seen as this good employee. So I kind of wish someone would have told me that earlier on. I'm glad there's a big focus now. I think because of COVID and everyone's working virtually, it's easy to just sit at your computer all day when you're home, right? So there's a focus on wellness, I would say, which maybe I didn't have when I first started. And I think that kind of ties to that ability of
Yeah. It's
saying no.
and one last question is more personal. Let's say, what would be your
Mhm.
superpower, Nicole?
Superpower. I feel like this might be one that a lot of people say, but it definitely is that I'm very organized. So, but I think that I was thinking about this. I think that combines with um, also being a bit of a minimalist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've lived internationally. I've moved a lot within my lifetime, even just within the United States. And so you learn to just not have
Mm-hmm.
many things
Yeah.
and and therefore you can be really, really organized. And so, in my work, I tend to pride myself on not just being organized, but that being organized allows me to get things done pretty quickly,
Faster.
right? So I would say that's probably what I think is my superpower. I don't know if other people would agree, but yeah.
Super. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Nicole.
This was fun. Thanks so much.